Hello everybody, welcome to the first instalment of SQL Week, and in the series of videos this week I'm going to show you how you can write a simple select statement to retrieve data from your database. Data is a very important asset for lots of organisations these days. Some people call it the new gold, or as I prefer to liken it, oil. Oil comes out of the ground in a mucky, nasty state and it's next to useless, but if you put it through a refining process, you can turn up with something really valuable at the end. And we're going to try and start you off on that journey this week by getting you to write some SQL queries. Now, why do you need to write SQL queries? Well, more and more organisations are slowly making their way on a data-driven path, right? And as a result of that, it's more and more necessary for people from different backgrounds to need to access the data and query the databases storing that business-critical data. Traditionally, SQL might have been a language used by, say, a DBA or developer, but these days it's not just DBAs and developers that are going to query the database. You might have business and data analysts or even hands-on CTOs or heads of IT. They do exist, they are out there, who want to query your read-only reporting databases. So with more and more people from different roles and different backgrounds wanting access to the data, because that can really help drive business decisions and drive good decisions as well, I wrote a series of posts last year showing people how they can query data in a relational database, and I'm turning these into a series of videos that will help you understand how to write a select statement to retrieve data from your database. So introduce you to the sort of basics of writing structured query language queries using the select statement to retrieve data that you then can turn into information to make decisions with. Now, writing SQL statements, it's easy. I guess writing it well can take some practice. Writing SQL queries for the very first time, which is what this video is aimed at, and what this post is aimed at, can be a little bit daunting, at least to begin with. But once you understand the basics, you can build from there. So in this video, we're going to start with some fundamentals and a simple select statement. Get you to understand the database and its structure. Now, we're not intending this to be a database design post. It's intended more as a starter for 10 in and around the terminology that gets used in relational databases and give you that sort of introductory level of understanding. So if this is your first step on your SQL journey, remember every journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, so you're on the right track. Okay, so let's dive into some of the fundamentals here. What is structured query language, or SQL? Structured query language, SQL or SQL, well, it's a programming language that's used to work with relational databases. There's an ISO ANSI standard, and most vendor platforms like Microsoft SQL Server or Oracle or DB2 have their own flavour or dialect of SQL. Right, in Microsoft SQL Server, that language is called Transact SQL or T-SQL. Most vendors will attempt to adhere to the standard as best they can. However, they all also deviate from that standard to some degree. Now, SQL is used for many things, but one of the main things it's used for is retrieving data from our database, right? But it can be used to do data modifications like insert, update, and deletes as well. So let's start with the building blocks of our. Let's look at a table. So the SQL is a query we're going to write that's going to retrieve data for us. Now, in order to write an SQL statement, we need to understand how the data is stored in our databases. Now, in a database, in the real world, right, the database is a model of real-life things. So we're going to call those things entities. It could be a customer, it could be a product, it could be an order. They represent the real-world things in your business. So data gets stored in a table, which is tabular. If you're familiar with Excel, it looks very similar to perhaps an Excel spreadsheet. I'll probably get dissed for saying that, but it's structured in that way, right? Now, the table will have a structure, right? And the table is used to store information about your entity. So you might have, say, an orders table that has order information in there. You might have a line items table that stores line item information. So think of the table as this logical storage unit for your entity. Right, customer data in the customer table, right? And now it's important to know this when it comes to writing your queries. Now, in a database table, right, there will be columns which are used to represent the attributes of an entity. So a customer table, our customer entity, right, that represents our customer. They could have several attributes that make it a customer, like a name, an address, a phone number, an email. right? And these are represented by the columns in the customer table. Rows are going to represent an instance of that entity. So we're not using the customer table as an example. Each row is a different customer that's part of our business. Right? So hopefully we're all good so far. Right? We've got a table made up of columns and rows which represent different pieces of columns represent the different pieces of information on a particular entity. The rows represent an instance of that entity. Right, so a picture probably says 1,000 words here. All right, so let's just clarify what I've just said. If I just click over one, so what we have on the screen here is looking at the customer table. So we can see there we've got a primary key. I'll talk more about those in a second. We've got different columns that represent first name and last name and customer ID. The column name is this is a result of a select statement. The column name is derived from the names that we name the column, and then each row is an instance of our customer. Now, a couple of things worth noting. Columns are identified by their names, they're not by their position, and rows are identified by the values in one or more columns. A unique column or combination of columns can be used to define the primary key. If your table's got a primary key set up on it, the database will enforce uniqueness in the column or columns used in the primary key. So therefore, no other row will have the same values in its key columns, and thus can be used to identify the row. So let's use an example to give some clarity here. Customer ID is defined as the primary key for our customer table, right? And that can be used to find an instance of our customer. Okay, the customer ID is going to uniquely identify the customer. So you can see there from this screenshot, I think customer with ID 1 is Orlando G. If we try and insert another row into this table with customer ID 1, the database will throw an error. And any query that's searching for customer ID 1 will always return Orlando G's row. Now in real life there's going to be relationships between our entities. So we'll stick with customer. We've got a customer and they're likely to have an order. Customer entity, order entity, there will be a relationship between them. Well, and they might have an address as well. So if we are modelling these out in our database, we can model the relationships between these entities as well. And this is where primary and foreign keys come in. So we can model the relationship between our tables and between our entities using a primary key or the parent table and a foreign key in a second table that's the child table. So using our customer table as an example, right, there's a relationship between the customer table and the customer address table, and I can show you this if I come into my database here. Right, this is a database diagram in Management Studio, and you can see here we've got our customer table with our primary key of customer ID, and then there is a foreign key in here. There's a one-to-many relationship between the customer table and the customer address. Now the foreign key also makes up the primary key of that table, so it's not the best example, but that is an example of showing the relationship between the two. So the customer ID is the primary key in the customer table, and the customer ID in the customer address table is the foreign key. And I like this view because it gives us a nice picture. Now, if you want to follow along with any of this, you need to get SQL Server Developer Edition, which is a free download. You need to install SQL Server Management Studio, and you will need to download the AdventureWorks LT Lite database here as well. And then just to finish up, once you've got all those installed, once you've got the database installed, we can then write a select statement. Now I'm going to pinch this from a webinar I did last week, and I'm going to pop that in here, and I'm going to choose use the SQL, use the AdventureWorks LT Lite. Right, now we've talked about the fundamentals, we've talked about tables, and now we're going to look at retrieving data from our customer table. So we use a select statement that's going to pull data back from a table for us. Now if I just come back to the slides for a second and just click over one. Alright, this is an overview of the statement, and on this slide I've got the layout of the clauses. So we have a select statement followed by a column list or column expressions, a from clause with an optional join and join condition. The where provides the filter. The group by allows us to do aggregations and do aggregations on groups. having acts as a filter on our aggregations, and an order by will define the order within which the statement the data is retrieved. Now note up on this slide here, there's a little asterisk or star. Star will return all columns. It's probably not a good idea to do that in production because your tables can change over time, so just actually state the columns or columns expressions you want to return. Don't use select star in your production code, right? But there is an example of this here. So what this simple query here is doing, right? I've gone to Management Studio, so let me show you what I've done. I fired up Management Studio, I've hit connect here, database engine, this is my local machine, and I've connected in, and you can see I've got a list of databases on here. I then go to that database and choose new query, and I think I've pasted it, so I've now got a new query where I can write my select. So the use statement will make sure I'm running my database, running my query in the right database. Right, the select star that I've just mentioned is going to return all columns from the customer table. You can see there's quite a reasonably wide table with different rows and different stuff in there, but the chances of me wanting to select just all the columns from a table is slim, so I'm going to be very specific, and I'm going to choose first name last name from customer and highlight it, hit execute. It gives me my results back. Now as we go through the week, we'll look at some of these other clauses as well. Hope you found this useful. If you have, hit a like below, hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and also if you are interested and would like to learn more, we're running a course at the end of February where we're going to look at SQL Essentials. If you want more information, scan the QR code or get in touch with me. My email address is on the slide there, and there's also a booking form on the website. But I hope you've enjoyed that. Like and subscribe if you want to follow along with the rest of the week.